Quiet twins get cornered by bullies, their response changes everything. A story by Heartfelt Tales. The hallway of Ridgewood High was usually loud with chatter, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking against polished floors. But on that cold Thursday morning, it fell into a strange hush. Students shifted nervously to the sides, watching as a group of 4 notorious bullies prowled like predators. At the end of the corridor stood 2 identical white twins, Liam and Lucas Hayes, backs against the wall, backpacks still slung over their shoulders. "Look at these 2, sneered Bryce Miller, the biggest of the bullies, his thick arms crossed and a cruel grin stretching across his face. "New kids think they can just stroll in here and own the place." Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, but his breathing remained controlled, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, just like Dad taught them. The familiar weight of his father's dog tags, hidden beneath his shirt, pressed against his chest like a reminder of everything they'd endured together. Beside him, Lucas's face was calm, but his blue-gray eyes were sharp, assessing every movement of the bullies. To the onlookers, the twins appeared trapped, 2 quiet boys cornered by a pack of older, stronger teens. Nobody knew the truth yet, nobody knew what the twins had been through or the skills they carried in silence. Because Liam and Lucas weren't just ordinary high school juniors. For 10 long years, their father, Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes, a decorated Special Forces operative, had trained them rigorously every dawn before school. The backyard session started when they were 7, right after their mother died in a car accident. Marcus, broken by grief but determined to protect what remained of his family, channeled his pain into preparation. "The world isn't fair, boys," he'd say as frost clung to the grass and their breath formed clouds in the morning air. "But strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about being ready when others aren't." They learned precision strikes, joint locks, defensive stances, and the discipline to never throw a punch unless absolutely necessary. They had endured bruised knuckles, aching muscles, hours of mental conditioning that built not just their bodies but their character. Marcus made them memorize one rule above all others: violence is the last resort of those who have exhausted every other option. The twins knew exactly how to break bones if they had to, and they also knew the heavy responsibility that came with that knowledge. Every technique came with a lecture about restraint, every sparring session ended with discussions about protecting the weak rather than dominating them. But that morning, as Bryce and his crew moved closer, testing how far they could push, that responsibility was about to be tested like never before. The trouble had been building for days, eating away at the twins' carefully maintained composure. From the moment they arrived at Ridgewood after their father's latest deployment, they drew unwanted attention. They were quiet but confident, straight-A students, fast runners on the track field, and strong enough to beat older kids at pull-ups during gym. To bullies like Bryce, that confidence was a challenge, an invitation to crush anyone who didn't cower. It started small: shoulder bumps in the hallway, whispered insults about them being weird army brats. Liam would clench his fists in his pockets while Lucas practiced the breathing exercises their father taught them for controlling anger. Then came the threats, locker notes warning them to stay in their lane, crude drawings taped to their desks, lunch trays accidentally knocked to the floor. Each incident chipped away at their resolve. Liam began having nightmares, not about the bullies, but about what he might do to them if pushed too far. He'd wake in cold sweats, remembering the satisfying crack when he'd broken the wooden practice boards during training, imagining that sound coming from human bones instead. Lucas carried the burden differently. He became hypervigilant, cataloging every threat, every escape route, every potential weapon in each room. The constant state of alertness exhausted him, but he couldn't turn it off. Their father had trained them too well. The twins ignored it all, just as Marcus had taught them: pick your battles. Don't escalate unless there's no way out. But each silent endurance felt like swallowing glass. But Bryce wasn't looking for peace. He and his 3 friends, Chad, Owen, and Mason, were itching for a spectacle. They spread rumors, tore pages out of Liam's math book, once even tried to trip Lucas down the stairs. The school staff never caught them, the twins never reported them. The breaking point came Tuesday afternoon. Bryce cornered them after school, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "You think you're tough? Tomorrow, everyone's gonna see what happens to freaks who don't know their place." That night, Liam couldn't eat dinner. Lucas stared at his homework without seeing the words. They both lay awake, knowing that everything their father had taught them was about to be put to the ultimate test. Until today. Bryce slammed a fist against a locker as they surrounded the twins. The clang echoed like a drumbeat, and Liam felt something shift inside him, not fear, but a cold, crystalline clarity he'd only experienced during the most intense training sessions. Lucas shifted his stance ever so slightly, weight balanced on the balls of his feet, ready, but calm. Around them, students pressed closer, phones already recording, hungry for violence. Sarah Martinez, a sophomore who'd been bullied by Bryce's crew last year, watched with tears in her eyes, remembering her own humiliation. Marcus Wells, the quiet kid from their chemistry class, felt his stomach twist, knowing he should help but paralyzed by his own fear. "Not looking so tough now," Chad jeered, cracking his knuckles. Owen and Mason snickered, already imagining their victory. A small crowd had gathered, phones out, expecting a typical beatdown. Nobody imagined the twins could fight back. Liam's voice came low, almost steady, though his heart was racing. "We don't want trouble. Just let us go to class." Even now, even surrounded, he was giving them one last chance to walk away. It was what their father would have wanted. Bryce smirked, interpreting the plea as weakness rather than mercy. "Oh, you're not going anywhere." That was the final line crossed. In that moment, 10 years of training crystallized into instinct. Bryce lunged, a massive hand swinging for Liam's collar. And that's when everything changed. It happened so fast that nobody could process it at first. Years of muscle memory took over as Liam's training kicked in with devastating precision. Bryce's arm jerked back violently as Liam twisted his wrist in a textbook joint manipulation, stepping sideways with perfect timing. The sound of Bryce's elbow nearly hyperextending made the crowd gasp, not just from the noise, but from the sudden realization that the weak twin had just disabled the strongest bully in school. At the same instant, Lucas deflected Chad's attempt to grab him, his movements fluid as water, spinning gracefully and sweeping Chad's legs out from under him with a technique that would have made their father proud. Chad hit the floor with a thud that rattled the lockers, his face a mask of shock and confusion. The watching students stood frozen, jaws dropping as their understanding of the world shifted. Sarah stopped crying, her eyes wide with something that might have been hope. Marcus fumbled with his phone, torn between filming and calling for help. Bryce roared in pain and humiliation, trying to punch Liam with his other hand, but Liam was already moving. He ducked under the wild swing, pivoted with dancer-like grace, and drove his shoulder into Bryce's chest, not hard enough to cause real damage, but sufficient to send the much larger boy stumbling backward, coughing and gasping for air. Meanwhile, Lucas moved like lightning, his years of training evident in every precise movement. He sidestepped Mason's wild swing and locked Mason's arm behind his back, applying just enough pressure to force him to drop to his knees with a sharp cry of surrender. "Stop," Lucas said, his voice firm but even, carrying the same authority their father used during combat drills. "You don't want this." The hallway had become a theater of the impossible. The feared bullies of Ridgewood High were being systematically dismantled by two quiet juniors who moved with the precision of trained soldiers. But Owen didn't listen. Rage and desperation driving him forward, he charged Liam with his fist raised, probably hoping to land one lucky punch and salvage some dignity for his crew. Liam caught Owen's wrist mid-air, twisted it downward with surgical precision, and in one clean motion pressed him against the wall. The look on Owen's face shifted from rage to fear as he realized that Liam could dislocate his shoulder effortlessly, and more importantly, that Liam was choosing not to. The entire hallway froze. The bullies, the feared tyrants of Ridgewood High, were on the ground or pinned in seconds. The twins hadn't thrown a single brutal punch or delivered any devastating blows. They had simply neutralized every attack with precision and control, demonstrating a level of skill that left everyone speechless. In the sudden silence, Liam felt his hands trembling, not from fear or adrenaline, but from the weight of what they'd just revealed about themselves. Lucas's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the crowd of staring faces, knowing that their lives at Ridgewood had just changed forever. A teacher finally rushed over, breathless and stunned by the sight of 4 older boys incapacitated by 2 juniors. Ms. Rodriguez, the chemistry teacher, had heard the commotion from her classroom but never expected to find this scene. Before anyone could speak, Bryce shouted in humiliation, his voice cracking with the kind of desperate anger that comes from having your entire identity shattered in front of an audience. "They're freaks. They fight like soldiers." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Liam felt his chest tighten. This was exactly what their father had warned them about, the moment when their training would mark them as different, dangerous, set apart from their peers. The teacher's gaze flicked between the twins and the moaning bullies, her administrative mind trying to process what she'd witnessed. She called security to escort Bryce and his crew to the principal's office, but her eyes kept returning to Liam and Lucas, seeing them with new understanding. Whispers erupted around the hallway like wildfire, disbelief and awe spreading through the crowd. Students who had watched in horror moments before now stared at the twins with a mixture of fear and respect. Some backed away, suddenly uncertain about these quiet boys who had just demonstrated they could destroy anyone in the school. Others pressed closer, hungry for details, for stories, for the chance to say they'd witnessed something extraordinary. The twins stood quietly as statements were taken, their training in discipline serving them even now. They told the truth, they hadn't started the fight. They only defended themselves. Other students backed them up with video footage that clearly showed the bullies had cornered them first, had thrown the first punches, had given them no choice. Sarah Martinez found her voice, stepping forward to tell Ms. Rodriguez about all the times Bryce's crew had terrorized other students. Marcus Wells surprised himself by speaking up, describing the weeks of harassment the twins had endured in silence. Other students began sharing their own stories, and suddenly the truth became clear. This hadn't been an unprovoked attack by 2 violent new students, but the inevitable result of systematic bullying that had finally pushed the wrong targets too far. The principal had no choice but to suspend Bryce and his friends for weeks. The twins were cleared of wrongdoing, but as they watched the bullies being led away, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line they could never uncross. But victory didn't feel sweet that day. As they walked home through the quiet suburban streets, away from the stares and whispers, Liam's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what they'd revealed about themselves. "We could have hurt them worse," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The admission hung between them like a confession. "When Bryce grabbed me, for just a second, I wanted to break his arm." "Really break it?" Lucas nodded solemnly, understanding flowing between them without words. They had both felt it, that moment when their training could have turned from defense to devastation, when they could have chosen to seriously injure rather than simply neutralize. "Dad always said, the real strength isn't breaking bones, it's knowing when not to," Lucas replied, echoing their father's voice with eerie precision. And yet, as they reached their empty house, Marcus was deployed for another 3 months. Both boys felt the weight of isolation settling around them like a shroud. News of their skill would spread quickly through the school's social networks. Some students would look at them with awe, others with fear. People would whisper about the silent fighters, saying they could take down anyone. The twins made a pact that evening as they sat in their father's study, surrounded by military commendations and family photos from happier times. They would never boast about what had happened. They would never demonstrate their training again unless absolutely necessary. They would try to return to being just normal students, if such a thing was even possible now. But something unexpected was already beginning to happen, something that would transform not just their own lives, but the entire culture of Ridgewood High. Instead of the isolation they feared, something beautiful began to emerge from the chaos. A few weeks later, as the twins ate lunch in their usual corner of the cafeteria, a shy freshman named Mia Chen approached their table with hesitant steps. She'd been bullied before by some of Bryce's younger followers and had heard what happened that day in the hallway. "Could you?" she began, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. "Could you teach me how not to be scared?" The question hit both twins like a physical blow. Here was this small, frightened girl asking not for revenge or violence, but for the one thing their father had always emphasized was the true purpose of strength, the confidence to stand tall in the face of fear. That's when the twins realized their purpose wasn't to fight bullies, it was to help others find their own strength. They started a self-defense club after school, meeting in the old wrestling room that hadn't been used in years. At first, only Mia joined, practicing basic stances and breathing exercises while Lucas patiently corrected her form and Liam shared the mental techniques their father had taught them for managing fear. Then Sarah Martinez showed up, still carrying the emotional scars from her own encounters with Bryce's crew. Then 5 more students. Then 20. The gym echoed with the sound of determined footsteps and focused breathing as the twins taught not just fighting techniques but confidence, discipline, and respect. They taught their students that real strength wasn't about dominating others, but about refusing to be dominated. They shared their father's lessons about protecting the vulnerable and using violence only as an absolute last resort. Most importantly, they created a community where students who had felt powerless could find their voices and their courage. The most surprising member came 3 months later. Bryce Miller appeared in the doorway one afternoon, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked like shame. His suspension had given him time to think, and what he'd seen in the mirror hadn't pleased him. "I want to change," he said simply, the words seeming to cost him everything. The twins didn't turn him away. They taught him too, patiently working through years of anger and insecurity that had driven his need to dominate others. Slowly, the school began to transform, as former victims found their confidence and former bullies learned healthier ways to channel their strength. Months later, Liam and Lucas stood on stage at a school assembly, now respected student leaders rather than mysterious outsiders. The auditorium was packed, filled with faces they had helped transform, students who had learned to stand taller, speak louder, and protect each other. Lucas spoke first, his voice steady and carrying across the silent crowd. "Everyone thinks strength is about hurting others. It's not. Real strength is protecting people, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." Liam stepped forward, his eyes finding familiar faces in the crowd: Mia, now confident and smiling; Sarah, who had started her own anti-bullying initiative; even Bryce, who now helped younger students with their homework instead of terrorizing them. "We didn't ask to fight bullies that day," Liam continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But we had no choice. If you ever feel cornered, remember, you're stronger than you think. And you never have to face it alone." The auditorium erupted in applause that seemed to shake the building's foundations. Cameras flashed from proud teachers and parents. Local news crews captured the moment for the evening broadcast. And for the first time since they arrived at Ridgewood, the twins felt like they truly belonged, not as the dangerous outsiders or the mysterious fighters, but as leaders who had helped their community discover its own strength. As they walked off the stage together, Liam's phone buzzed with a text from their father, stationed thousands of miles away but somehow always present when they needed him most. "Proud of you both. That's what real soldiers do, they protect others and build them up. Love, Dad." The twins smiled, knowing that they had finally understood the most important lesson their father had tried to teach them: true strength isn't measured by who you can defeat, but by who you can inspire to become their best selves. If you've been watching this story and felt the pain of being bullied or wished you had the courage to stand up, not just for yourself but for others, remember this: you have power inside you that no bully can take away. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help, build a community, and discover that you never have to face your fears alone. Comment below, have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought you were weak? How did it change you? And if you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales for more powerful and inspiring stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit.